Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I am your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy, and hello, viewers and listeners. Our topic for today is
Why everything you've heard about couples therapy is wrong.
isn't that great clickbait? You know, isn't that shameless? Is that a
Yes, that
shameless
is
title?
shameless. Yes,
We'll
that
come
is
back
totally
around to that.
shameless.
Yes, in a bit we'll talk about why. And again, I claim blame or responsibility, as the case may be, for that title. We'll come back around to that shortly. But before we do that, we would first of all like you to do the things people do to let people know about podcasts. Especially, please interact with our posts on social media. We've actually engaged a person to help us do that, since neither one of us is expert in
Should
that
we
area.
be admitting that?
Admitting, I dare say, we should be claiming it. That's what people do these days.
That's
as
what people
podcasts
do.
grow. You know, it's like,
what
oh,
people
we
do.
actually found an expert to help us. And but that is one thing that we would like you to do. So when you see a post about us on social media, if you would please, at very least, like it and maybe share it and comment on it and that kind of stuff, that would be great. And then where you get your podcasts, if you would rate it and comment on it.
5-star.
5 stars, please. That would be delightful. Thank you very much for that. And we want to put in a word for our sponsor, which is my book, which is
Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
available anywhere where books are sold, and we would like you to acquire that. And of course, do the same thing with that. Comment and put in a review, especially on Amazon. That's where people seem to find out about books these days overwhelmingly. And it's available in any format you like, which is to say paper or Kindle or Audible. And I did the narration. So let's get into our topic for today.
Okay.
Yeah, why everything you've heard about couples therapy is wrong. Of course, now you know me.
Yes,
Our listeners,
the
perhaps,
couples therapist over here.
yeah, the couples
Yes.
therapist over here, who, and of course, the first thing I'm going to comment about why everything you've heard about couples therapy is wrong is that includes what I'm about to say. So, all right, so come on, this is already absurd, right?
Right.
But I still claim there's an awful lot about what people have heard about couples therapy that I claim is just not going to work for you and often doesn't. And I hear about this from folks who've been to other therapists and, God, boy, does this sound egotistical or what? Yes, okay, fair enough.
They've never communicated as well as since they've gone to you.
Yeah, you could say communicated as well. You just want to make sure that thing isn't touching the speaker so we're not getting clunk, clunk, clunk. A little transparency there, folks.
Okay.
So let me ask you, if I said to you, hey, everything you've heard about couples therapy, it's wrong. Now, you're married to a couples therapist, right? So you're going to have to take that into account. But what have you heard about couples therapy? What do you think? If some friend of yours said, not what does Bruce do, but just in general, what goes on in couples therapy? What would you say to folks?
Well, that's a really good question because having never gone for couples therapy, but I do know people who've gone for couples therapy.
Yeah.
So my assumptions about couples therapy is that the therapist is there to help couples get to the problems that they're having, the genesis sometimes of their problems, what each partner's expectation is of the other one, what their expectation is in marriage and relationships, how to fight. I guess that's always a good one, how to fight.
You're talking about, if I can overgeneralize a bit, you're talking about tools.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
I hear that all the time.
Yes.
We need some tools.
We need tools. We need tools and rules.
Tools and rules, right? We need things, procedures we can follow, a structure,
Right.
something that will help us. Yeah, that is what I would refer to as the car mechanic view of couples therapy. And I say that with actually respect, right? It's like, come on, something's broken. Would you please help us fix it?
Right.
You go to a doctor for a physical cause. Would you please figure out what the symptoms represent and get in there and apply your expertise and fix it? Not a weird thing to want.
Not a weird thing to want,
Not
right?
a weird
You got
thing
a
to want.
problem, you want it fixed.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? There are some folks who come to me where that occasionally that's what happens. It's like, oh, I see what the problem here is. The problem is you have some expectations of how step parenting is going to go that you better look at carefully because it doesn't usually go that way. You know what I mean? I'll apply my expertise. I've talked to so many couples and studied the research and yada yada yada, and I can help with that.
Okay.
Fair enough. But the reason that it turns out that expectation often doesn't get you very far. I'll tell stories. What do I hear from couples? Again, these couples I hear, which is quite a few couples who come to me who've been to other couples therapists. And look, many of them have been to other couples therapists who help them a great deal. I don't mean to be dissing my profession, and I'm opening myself to being criticized, and I deserve it. Right? Fair enough. I get that. But they'll often go to folks and it'll be helpful, and but sometimes they'll go to folks and they'll say, it just wasn't very helpful.
Yeah.
Because the therapist was so full of their precious ideas. This includes me, by the way. I'm full of my precious ideas too. But the therapists are so full of their precious ideas about exactly why things go wrong that they force everything into that mold. And when you do that, it doesn't work very well. Now, again, if I go, my favorite example, I don't want to pretend that I'm some kind of trained philosopher, because I'm not. But there's a school of thought that therapists will talk about called, in general, positivism.
Okay.
Where positivism means it's like there's a reality out there that the therapist might be able to figure out even if the couple can't. And the therapist can therefore get in there and fix it. It's the car mechanic approach. When I had my gallbladder problems about 20, a long time ago. A while ago. I was glad to go to a surgeon who was a positivist. In other words, the surgeon didn't say, let me understand the social construction of your pain that you're experiencing. And the funny thing is, there's a case to be made for that. At one time, the pain I was experiencing at roughly 50 years old would have been thought of as old age. And what are you complaining about? That's what happens, and you're probably going to die of it. I was really glad to find a surgeon who said, no, you got gallstones in there. We'll take the puppies out, and you'll be a lot better.
Well, there are some things that are concrete, like gallstones, and there are other things that are not quite concrete, like people's personalities and how they interact.
And positivist therapists, though, are quite convinced that people's personalities and how they interact are every bit as amenable to that kind of understanding as gallstones are. Now, to take a broad swipe at a very useful school of therapeutic thought that I'll bet you folks watching this have all heard of, cognitive behavioral therapy. You've heard of CBT.
I have heard of CBT.
Everybody's heard of CBT.
Don't ask me what it is, but I have heard of it.
I'll tell you. And look, here I am taking a broad, swipe at CBT. I have learned tremendously from the techniques of CBT. I apply them. It's great stuff, right? Having said that, CBT was originally developed in a way that is more or less manualized. You know what I mean by manualized therapy? It's like you study the manual, right? Go by the book, and so let me see what your cognitive distortions are, and we'll figure out what they are, and then by correcting those cognitive distortions, you're going to feel a lot better, and you'll do better, and you can do this in an individual context and in a couple's context, and isn't that wonderful, right? Funny thing happened to CBT along the way, which was they started realizing it works when it works, but it doesn't work when people are freaking the heck out.
Okay.
And so what you see more recently are things like CBT with mindfulness training. Mindfulness training, I would argue, is the polar opposite of CBT. CBT is all about understanding your thoughts, and by correcting your thoughts, that's why they call it cognitive behavioral therapy. By correcting your thoughts, you will correct what's going on, and then you'll feel better. Your feelings will follow the fact that your thoughts are all messed up.
Okay.
CBT therapists figured out quite a while ago that not if people are freaking the heck out. And if we start applying a lot of the research that's been done in the past 15, 20 years on mindfulness techniques, oh, look at that. When you get people to not be freaking out, which is the very opposite of messing with your thoughts, you realize. You've done meditation. You've all done mindfulness stuff, folks. I'll bet you have, which is wonderful, by the way. I'm a fan. When you do that kind of stuff, or you also know I'm trained in hypnosis, right?
Right.
Hypnosis is the very opposite of CBT. It's not anything like, let me mess with your cognitive distortions. It's, in fact, let me get in there and distort some of your cognitions with therapeutic metaphor, you know, distort in a helpful way, you know. I just did I did a, if you know this, folks don't know this, I don't mind a little self-disclosure here.
Go ahead.
I was scheduled for an MRI, and I just found it was, I'm not totally prone to claustrophobia, but enough. And so I downloaded a hypnosis tape on that, and it's been incredibly helpful to me. And what the main technique that they use in that hypnosis tape is time distortion. It's an actual, intentional distortion. It's the very opposite of CBT, right? So here I'm saying that if you think you have a manualized therapy, it doesn't work. You have to do something that addresses the other side. So now let me invoke one of my favorite shticks that anybody who's read my book, remember my book? Anybody who's read my book will know about, which is the two basic needs that we're all after. And both are really important. And the two needs I'm referring to are
stability
and
intimacy.
Exactly, right. Now, CBT and its cousins are all addressing which of those?
Stability.
Totally stability. It's all about stability.
Yeah.
And you're an educator for folks who, if you've been following us, you know Judy is a now retired retired principal, but of course many years a teacher, and so you know about classroom management. I think we mentioned this in one of our other podcasts, right?
Yep.
Classroom management is what, 98% about stability. Of course it is, and again, stability is important. You could think
it is. When you got 25 little kids running around, stability is very important.
Absolutely. And I am not knocking it. And indeed, the fact that I'm stressing intimacy is not because stability isn't important. It's because everything you've heard about therapy, quote unquote, that over that silly phrase, everything you've heard about therapy is about stability. All of those tools that people want are about stability. Stability is important. It's not like it isn't. But
right.
Here's the
butt.
The big butt,
big butt.
so to speak, double entendre or whatever. You can look at me and say, "Oh, there's the big butt," I deserve that. So no, the big butt is the thing about just stressing stability is it becomes deadly.
Yeah.
When you elevate
the relationship, certainly.
Well, yeah, when you elevate the rules to the main point as opposed to facilitating stability. We talked about this in our last podcast. 5 ridiculous rules, right?
Right.
It's not that any of those rules are bad ideas. It's that when you elevate them to the main point of what you're doing, you lose intimacy. Because intimacy doesn't follow rules. Now, again, don't misquote me, folks. I'm not saying don't follow rules. Rules are important. Stability is really important. I am saying that if you make the rules the point, they become oppressive to intimacy. So that, and we used this example, I think, in our last conversation, right? If we're sitting here and having some heartfelt conversation because we're both feeling something, be it positive, negative, or just, worried about something, or just deeply affected by each other in a lovely way, any of those things, and we stop and say, wait a second, now according to the rules, I'm supposed to make sure I understood everything you said and say it back to you, and you have to agree before I get to say my part, right?
Right.
You want to have sex like that? And it really, and I invoke that notion of sex because it's such a great example of it. It's like, really? You want to live like that? It's organic. Right. Intimacy is organic. It is not rule following.
So what does this have to do about couples therapy being everything you've heard being wrong?
Well, great point. So what people will, this is back to my shtick about, it's not about communication. I'm making that more broadly now. It's not about the rules. It's not about the tools even. It's about facilitating in the course of a conversation both stability and intimacy. So the thing that I do usually in a first session, almost always in a first session, is talk about that distinction between stability and intimacy. And I generally see the light bulbs much if it's a heterosexual couple, much more often from the woman first. The woman saying, "Oh, wow, that's wow, you're onto something there."
Mm-hmm.
The man often, but often less so,
Mm-hmm.
because the men are thinking, "I just need her to not be so mad at me all the time." And the women are thinking, you're onto something there. Yeah, the problem is the intimacy part. It's like he doesn't know how to hear me. He doesn't know. I don't feel connected.
Mm-hmm.
That's what women are saying.
Yeah.
Men are saying, by stereotyping here, yes.
Yes.
I'll stop apologizing. Men are saying, she don't have sex with me, or she's mad at me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I keep trying to help her when she brings up a problem, and she keeps being mad that I keep trying to help her, and she's trying to say, I don't want you to insult my intelligence by trying to fix a problem that I don't know how to fix, that I know more about than you. I want to tell my husband that I'm hurting, and I want him to say, wow, I hear it. Tell me more. It's like, I feel for you,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm impressed because I know that you are entirely capable, and this must be a hard problem for you not to be able to solve it. Right? That's the stuff women want to
Right.
hear. Yeah.
Right.
That's about intimacy. That's not about stability.
Yeah.
And
Well, man, and it sounds like they might be afraid of rocking the stability boat.
well, that is precise. And women are often too.
Yeah. Yeah.
That-
Sure.
Right? That's exactly the problem. So when people start to recognize it's not that they need rigid rules, again, not knocking some structure.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they need rigid rules. It's that their problem is that their anxiety spikes when they hit something that is scary.
So then, as a couples therapist, what do you do differently than other therapists, or at least from what you've heard when couples come to you
Yeah.
and they say we've been to one or two, sometimes more therapists, and nothing seems to be working? What do you do for them that has been lacking with other therapists?
I will answer that in just a second. I want to establish, you'd mentioned you didn't happen to have gone to couples therapy before.
Uh-huh.
We folks who followed us know we're both in a second marriage with each other
Mm-hmm.
here. I did several. So I've
Let
seen
me say, I did suggest it.
Yeah, you did. I know you've said that in your first marriage.
In the first marriage.
And look, I only mention that because I think there's a certain level of credibility that's important. I would have a problem going to a couples therapist who'd never experienced couples therapy.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably silly because there's all kinds of happily married couples therapists who I bet are very good at it. So don't take that don't overstate that. But anyway, yes, what do I do that I think is somewhat different? Well, it's that stability and intimacy dichotomy that I tend to start off with early on in a conversation that I think establishes this is not going to be the same thing. Because when we get into the conversation about intimacy and recognize the problem, and I always include in my little spiel, the chief skill of stability is to avoid or lower anxiety. Important, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to act in ways that freak you out, and I don't want
Mm-hmm.
you to act in ways that freak me out, and I think vice versa, and that's why we
Mm-hmm.
get along. That's all about stability. But intimacy is about saying, I don't know if this is going to freak you out, but I'm going to risk it because it's important to me. I don't want it to freak you out, but it may cause some anxiety. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
propose something you haven't heard before, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to object to something, or
Sure.
whatever. So being willing to do that is the key to intimacy. That's what's surprising often to people. It's like, oh, what you're saying is we have to worry less about rocking the boat, not completely throw away stability, not turn into idiots,
Mm-hmm.
which is another, by the way, that's another problem with especially individual therapy. I have met folks whose individual therapists have turned them into idiots, or perhaps have simply facilitated their already being idiots. And I'm sorry to be unkind in saying it that way. Idiots in a particular way. Idiots is probably an unkind word. I don't mean unsmart. I mean assholes. Can I say that on our podcast?
I mean, just acting like jerks.
Acting like jerks, yes.
Okay.
You know what, folks? I'm not going to bleep that word, so we'll see if that gets us in trouble with the various platforms. Yeah, acting like jerks. In other words, acting like entitled jerks.
Mm-hmm.
Acting like only their considerations
Right.
matter.
And being
any,
insensitive to the other partner's feelings.
well, not only insensitive, but feeling so entitled to not being made uncomfortable that anything turns into an offense. That isn't going to work in an actual relationship with another human being.
Right.
And we see that actually being played out now on college campuses a lot, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the notion that somebody coming up with an idea that makes you uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
that constitutes an aggression.
Yeah.
That in college, for crying out loud, which well, back in my day, folks, you went to college to be made uncomfortable. That's why you went to college. You didn't necessarily say it that way, but I remember my freshman year, these people who came from all kinds of other backgrounds all over the country,
Mm-hmm.
and their politics was shifting 180 degrees one way or the other, and it's all about being exposed to ideas that make you uncomfortable.
Right.
So, getting back to your specific question, like, what do I do?
What do you do?
Manishtana. What's different? What differentiates? For those of you who are Jewish, you'll recognize the phrase. What differentiates it is, first of all, job one for me. This is true pretty much for any therapist, but I, I often comment on this to people. Job one for me is to be the one person in the conversation who's not freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
to contribute a calm nervous system
Mm-hmm.
without avoiding a difficult issue, to be somewhat relaxed in the presence of people who totally understandably are anything but relaxed. That itself facilitates intimate communication because I am projecting behaviorally, this is possible to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And to make something possible to talk about is a huge step toward intimacy. And I don't make it possible to talk about by ruling out uncomfortable topics. I make it possible to talk about by not freaking out about uncomfortable topics and inviting people to consider what they want. Again, with great respect. I'm not trying to make people uncomfortable, but I am not
So you don't
avoiding
have
it either.
people shouting at each other.
No.
Yeah.
No, and I am. People can tell from this conversation. Look, I'm in this conversation. I'm the one who wrote the book, right? So I'm the.
You're the
Look,
expert.
I'd be the. Well, I'm thinking more. I'm the blabbermouth. I would be the blabbermouth anyway. I mean, that's a standard male-female thing where men think women talk more and it's nonsense. We talk more, whatever.
Most definitely.
Right, and women know it and men don't, right? Yeah, like he says, mansplaining to the woman.
Well, since this is a couples therapy podcast, I will defer to you on this one.
Well, just in
If this
terms
were
of
an
the therapy.
education podcast, I would take over.
Absolutely.
But this is not.
Yeah, but the point being, with respect to maintaining control of a session, I am quite explicit about that. I will maintain control of the session. In 26 plus years of private practice, I have ended less than a handful, 3 or 4 sessions maybe, prematurely because I couldn't control them. I've said, I can't let this go on. That hasn't, I shouldn't say this out loud for fear of tempting fate. It hasn't happened for quite a few years. I think maybe it's because I'm older and more vulnerable. I've gotten better at it. I may be perhaps more selective
And
about.
now on Zoom, you can mute people.
I've never done that. Ken O'Hara, not quite. I have never done that. I've never controlled the microphone. I can do it, but I've never done it. No, I've never shut people up with the microphone now that I'm doing, telehealth. But no, the point being, no, it is important to maintain a sense of mutual respect.
Sure.
So yeah, and I always say this to people. When I say you need to be able to say what's important to you, that doesn't for a moment mean ignore being a decent person, ignore being compassionate, ignore being respectful. No, of course not. All of those are super important. But don't let the rules kill intimacy. And the problem, as we said in our previous podcast, you might check that out, folks, the one about, 5 ridiculous rules about communicating with your partner. The reason why the rules are a problem isn't because they say bad things. It's because when you focus on the rules rather than focusing on actually being alive, intimacy goes out the window. It's classroom management as opposed to actually inviting the kids to feel alive.
Yeah.
And look, I have amazing, as you know, I have incredible respect for teachers. I am in awe of you and your colleagues, especially teachers of, middle school kids, which you are expert at. You're like this, folks. Judy is a bar and bat mitzvah whisperer. She has those kids just totally relaxed and with her, and she's amazing. I couldn't do that. But I think it is a lot about projecting that clarity of stability at the same time as you are genuinely loving them,
Yeah.
which they can see,
Right.
and that's the intimacy part. And folks, and again, I'm thinking about teachers I've had. I had teachers who were terrible at stability, and so it didn't matter if they loved us or not. It was awful. I
Yeah.
remember it was an awful experience. I had teachers who were all about stability to the point where it was deadly in the sense of fear.
Yeah.
And then you had those teachers who they kept control by their presence,
Yeah.
and you knew they loved you.
Yeah.
God, I'm going to get emotional. You knew they loved you.
Right.
So you're asking, so now I can answer that question another way. Like,
Okay.
what do I do differently? I love the people I work with, even if I don't like them much. And one of the things I've gotten better at in terms of picking folks I work with is I tend to like them. Or I tend not to take on situations that I think I'm probably not going to like them. I mean, I don't mean to be all that judgy about that. There's plenty of people that I just don't know, and I come to like them even if I didn't at first, But I generally love them.
Yeah.
And that's what's being conveyed. So I am very much in control of the session and very active. I'm not. I don't. That's another one. Early on, I've told this story. I think even on this podcast in one of our episodes. Early on, my first year or two of practicing. This is back in the days when you made an appointment by calling someone on the phone. You remember that? Remember telephones where you called and you
I
didn't know who
do,
was
and
going
people actually picked up.
People picked up. It was a phone, and you picked it up.
It wasn't necessarily the person you wanted to call.
That's right. Well, though it was if you called my office.
Well,
'cause
that's
it
true.
was me.
Yes.
But so people would call, and every once in a while somebody would say, "Do you talk?"
Oh yeah, like
Yeah.
the old.
Yeah, and I at first I didn't understand. We're talking on the phone here. I speak.
But that stereotype where you're sitting there, they're lying on on the couch, and you're just taking notes and like
I'm saying,
doodling and saying
Yeah.
every once in a while.
And I have met couples
Yeah.
where pretty much what the couples therapist has done is just let them converse and say occasionally. Not a lot, but I've heard that. With all due respect.
And basically fight the whole time that they're
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
office.
exactly,
And yell
yeah.
out and air their grievances.
Yeah, yeah. And they end up feeling like it's just a slugfest, which doesn't do them any good, or they end up feeling like they're trying to convince the therapist of who should win, which
Right.
doesn't do them any good.
Right.
Which is another aspect, by the way, of loving the people I work with, that I have to be able to. I'm not impartial. I'm just not partial.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, I'm an interested party, but I am not.
You're not there to take sides.
I'm not there to take sides, except that I want us all to be on the same side, which
Right.
is, spiritually speaking, tikkun olam, to use the modern phrase, the modern Jewish phrase, repairing the world. It's spiritual work,
Yeah.
which is another aspect of intimacy. That's all about intimacy. So, the point, actually, we were discussing this topic, and you pointed out something I thought was really interesting as well. That notion that it's all about stability, not intimacy. Remember the analogy you were using?
Oh, was that the one about dieting?
The one about dieting. Yeah, I
Right.
thought that was really. What you say about that?
Yeah, that if you want to lose weight, oftentimes people will go on a diet, and you go on this, whether it's Atkins or whatever the diet is. You lose weight. You lose weight, and you're feeling really great. Oh wow, I went on this diet. I lost 20 pounds. I'm looking good. I'm feeling good about myself, and then slowly the weight starts creeping back on. It's like, well, maybe I'll try a different diet. Okay, so this month I'm going to be on South Beach. Go on the diet, lose weight, slowly go off the diet.
So what? You just
go
said
off
it.
the diet.
You go off the diet.
Right.
That's the key. That's the same idea. The rules that people want to have. Okay, let's follow the rules of, and here's another one that a lot of folks have heard of, that I've heard people talking about, which again, I have respect for this, but be careful turning it into be careful idolizing it, nonviolent communication, NVC. It has its own acronym, nonviolent communication.
That's a thing, huh?
It's a thing, yeah. And again, I respect it, except that the couples that I've seen who are trying it now, realizing I don't have a random sample, the couples that are coming to me after having tried it, it's because it didn't work very well. right? The couples for whom it worked, I don't get to meet. So
Right.
I don't mean to be wholesale dismissing it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the way people communicate when they're just relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way people communicate when they're worried about how they're going to communicate. Not bad ideas. I'm not knocking the ideas. But when you focus on that as the point, it becomes oppressive. And you see that with, oh my God, you see that with people who are education theories. You again, this is your area of expertise, right? Every few years there's another trend in education and it comes along and this is how you have to do it and it's got to be that way and it's all
Yep.
about the ideas.
Yep.
And there's probably some good ideas in there,
Mm-hmm.
but it turns into this is what the research says you should do, and the actual living people implementing it don't do it that way
Right.
or just feel oppressed by it.
Well, because they have a very small sample group where they test this thing out and
Mm-hmm.
they go, oh, well, it worked. It worked in this little white neighborhood in Wisconsin, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can roll it out and have it work across the entire country, rural schools in Mississippi, urban schools in, Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and it just does not work
Yeah.
in different settings.
And again, I think a lot of it has to do with it's all about stability. It's not about intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
That intimacy requires that you be, you know, it what. So now I'll give another one of my favorite points about this. Those of you who know this podcast, we're Jewish. We bring in a lot of Jewish stuff. I bring Jewish stuff into my book. This is central, at least to my understanding of Judaism. And here I want to shout out to the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who made this point in various ways, very eloquently, much more than I. Judaism is a lot about, well, again, this is not his language, it's mine. It's a lot about both stability and intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
You think there aren't rules and structures in Judaism? Are you serious? Any of us who do anything traditional, and our level of traditional is somewhat, but not like Orthodox, but one of our kids is Orthodox, and we have, lots of Orthodox friends, and Orthodoxy can be viewed as a form of OCD. It's like, oh yeah, is it structured? Is it traditional? Absolutely. And yet, central to the whole system of Jewish law and tradition is a living element of it.
Mm-hmm.
You can find quotes in the Talmud that will point out that, we'll come up with these wonderful cognitive structures that explain why the law it has to be this way, and this is what God said, in written or oral tradition, and this is why it has to be that way. And then you observe that the great mass of people are simply not doing it that way. And they're realizing we have to take that into account. We have to recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is the solution to that, oh, ditch the tradition, people aren't doing it? Absolutely not. Is the solution to that, impose the tradition on people a la the Taliban? Absolutely not. It's the tension between the two that has to exist. And that's why Judaism has survived as long as it has. And that, I suppose, is another thing I bring to couples therapy. And look, I do not do religious-based therapy at all. The vast majority of folks I work with are not Jewish, of course, because we live in an area that doesn't have a very large Jewish community. And I have had Jewish clients who I don't happen to know, but so many of the potential Jewish clients one of us would know, I can't be the therapist. So in any case, the vast majority of folks around here are not Jewish, mostly of Christian backgrounds, not very religious in Vermont. It's one of the least religious states in the country. I do not impose religion on anybody, but I am very much informed by that understanding of what I call intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
That sense of, you have to see how this applies to real people in real situations, and don't get too enamored of your precious tools, because they're going to be oppressive if you get too enamored of them.
Right. So you have to give people basically the ability to be themselves in a couple without having to adhere to dogma.
That is a great way of saying it. Absolutely true. And, dogma applied not only in terms of some externally stated rules,
Mm-hmm.
but dogmas we all bring to things without realizing it. I do a lot of looking into people's assumptions, and I don't do that. I say this to people. I'm not trying to say throw them out. I'm saying you should know what they are,
Mm-hmm.
because they may be having effects that you didn't realize. And this is, classic. I mean, gender stuff is all about that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, gender stuff is very useful.
Yeah.
Be careful that it doesn't become oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true in lots of different ways. Pretty much anybody's philosophical or cognitive system, it's useful, but it isn't the whole story.
So if folks are looking for a therapist, a
Mhm.
couples therapist, and I'm sure people have said, I want to interview you to see how you work, type of
Mhm.
thing. What should they be looking for in a couples therapist?
I've had that question.
Uh-huh.
I haven't got a good answer. It's really hard for me to say. I can tell you a bunch of things that I think probably aren't as important as people tend to think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Gender, for example, gender of the therapist, sexual orientation of the therapist, important in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
but not the whole story. You can go to somebody. Lots of people are looking either for a male or a female therapist, or
Right.
are looking for a straight therapist or a gay therapist or whatever. Those, especially the sexual orientation thing, I totally recognize I don't have qualification to be a super, informed LGBTQ type therapist, because I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be informed about a lot of those issues because plenty of it does come up in sessions with folks that I work with. But I don't know anyone. Well, see, this is the same idea, right? Isn't it? I don't know any one kind of descriptor, categorical descriptor, that I would say, oh yeah, you definitely want to go somebody who's trained in this school of thought, or who
Well, it
has
sounds
these,
like you're saying you don't want to be with anybody who's trained in any particular school of
So
thought.
yes, let me modify that slightly. You don't want to go to anybody who's doctrinaire.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you find that out without talking to them. So when
Yeah.
you say people interview them to see if it's okay, to me that's called the first session.
Uh-huh.
I don't tend to. I mean, I'm happy to answer people's questions, before we meet if they want. But in general, until we actually start working, I don't think it's going to mean that much. I don't think you're going to know that much about a therapist until you actually work with them. Of course, what you hear from your friends,
Mm-hmm.
fair enough.
Right.
That's useful. I
Right.
went to somebody and they really helped. Well, great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. It's just so interesting, which degree they have. I happen to have a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
That does not qualify me in the slightest more than anybody else who has a decent, has legitimate training.
Right.
There's plenty of people who have, master's level or social work degrees or whatever they may be, who are every bit as skilled as I am,
Mm-hmm.
and more so in some areas. You know what I mean? I wouldn't worry so much about that. I do tend to think, in terms of accountability, I like the idea of licensure. And the reason for that, licensure, for good or ill, licensure does not guarantee competence.
Right.
It just doesn't. I mean, there's all kinds of incompetent people and also very competent people. But what licensure says is there's a specific body to complain to if somebody's really horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an important element of accountability. So I would say, yeah, find somebody who's got a legitimate license in the place that you're working. But no, beyond that, I suppose I have a bias toward people with some experience, but I've known some young, kind of fresh out of training therapists who just seem to be really dynamite from my perspective. Haven't gone to such a person myself, but
Right.
Folks I've gone to have tended to be more experienced. But the folks I've worked with in consultation groups and stuff, there are some just really smart and insightful and caring folks, even if they're young. So you kind of have to try a few. I know it's a bummer because it's painful when you're looking. So I think we've sort of covered our topic today.
I think we have.
Indeed. So you notice today we didn't actually come up with a we didn't have a
We didn't
a
go through our
question.
mailbag.
Yeah, our mailbag didn't have a question that was super relevant to this.
Right.
But that's your cue.
My cue. Oh, but if you have questions
Thank you.
and you would like us to answer it on the air, please feel free to write us. You can write us at email bruce@brucechalmer.com or visit the website brucechalmer.com.
And when you visit brucechalmer.com, if you navigate over to the podcast website, that's where you'll have access to all of our episodes. You'll also be able to make suggestions by contacting us. You can just email, or you can even sign up for a time to be interviewed by us on the podcast, if you think you would be a good guest, we would love to hear from you. And that we have folks that we are already lined up, and we're in the process of lining up some other great guests. We have a lot of fun. Again, if you've seen our podcasts where we have guests there, they've always been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I also want to put in a word for my book again.
Right? Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back, since we were talking about intimacy today.
Indeed, we were. And that book is, that subtitle is, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy. It's all about that stability and intimacy thing. And I can't resist mentioning the 7 words that the book is based on as well, which is why we call this Couples Therapy in 7 words. And the 7 words are...
Be kind, don't panic, and have faith.
Yeah, be kind, don't panic, and have faith. The way you can not freak out, that's the don't panic part, is, and that's what facilitates intimacy, is have faith. It's a lot about faith. You want to learn more about that, read the book, listen to some of the podcasts we've done on faith. Maybe, I'm sure it'll come up in other podcasts as well. And so, again, as we mentioned earlier, please interact with our social media posts. That would be really helpful for us, and let more people know about this podcast. I have noticed our podcast numbers keep on increasing, which is very nice.
That's good. Thank you.
We're trying to.
Thanks for spreading the word.
Yeah, we're trying to push toward viral,
The good viral.
The good viral, exactly. And so we would like you to do that, and rate us and comment as well. And so until next time,
remember, be kind,
don't panic,
and have faith.